The following content has been generated with artificial intelligence under minimal human supervision. The data presented may contain errors or inaccuracies. The opinions expressed in this content do not necessarily reflect the vision, position, or values of DigiAll. We recommend verifying critical information with additional sources before making decisions based on this content.
Welcome to DigiAll Tech News. Today is Saturday, July 11th, 2026. I'm Kylie Brooks, and this is where technology becomes clear and engaging. Apple has sued OpenAI, alleging the company used former Apple employees, hardware parts, and confidential files to accelerate its own device ambitions. China's open-weight AI models are turning free local access into a soft power advantage, even as top US models remain closed. The U.S. Commerce Department has made it easier to export advanced AI chips, servers, satellites, and certain military items to the U.A.E. Meta has pulled a new Instagram AI image feature after privacy advocates and users objected to how it used public profile pictures and user content. Christopher Nolan says younger filmmakers and audiences are rapidly rejecting AI slop, just as practical filmmaking is regaining cultural pull. Let's start with a legal fight that shows the AI race is no longer just about models. It is also about hardware, suppliers, and talent. Apple filed suit in California on Friday, July 10th, accusing OpenAI of stealing trade secrets to speed up its own device work. The complaint names Tang Yu-tan, OpenAI's chief hardware officer and a former Apple vice president, and alleges he directed Apple job candidates to bring physical parts to show and tell sessions and took supplier data with him. Apple also alleges former employee Chung Liu took an Apple laptop, used an authentication bug to access the internal network, and downloaded dozens of confidential hardware files. OpenAI says it is reviewing the filing and has no interest in other companies' trade secrets. Apple wants damages and a court order blocking use of the disputed information. What makes this especially sharp is the reversal. Apple integrated ChatGPT across iOS, iPadOS, and macOS in 2024, then used Google's Gemini for a Siri revamp in June 2026. In practical terms, this is the uncomfortable boundary every AI hardware company now has to manage. Hiring expertise is fair competition, but confidential design files and supplier intelligence are a very different line. Now this is where open-weight AI becomes geopolitics. Andrew Ng, co-founder of Google Brain and former chief scientist at Baidu, pointed out at a July event in Los Angeles that Chinese companies are releasing open-weight AI models for free download and local use, while leading US systems from OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google remain closed and proprietary. Open-weight matters because a government, university, or company can run the model on its own infrastructure and adapt it locally, rather than depending entirely on a remote API. The argument is that China now leads globally in open-weight models, even while closed US models still hold a capability edge, and that tools such as DeepSeek are being widely adopted across Africa over American alternatives. The bigger issue is not just access, it is influence. A model's answers on politically or culturally sensitive subjects, like Tiananmen Square in 1989, can carry the values and silences of the system that trained it. Kai-Fu Lee's point is blunt. All large language models embed some cultural censorship, whether the pressure point is the party, race, and gender, or blasphemy. Eric Schmidt adds the security side, calling for RLHF guardrails that cannot simply be removed, and a no-surprise rule for frontier training runs. So the trade-off is real. Open models can lower costs and support local independence, but they also force countries to ask whose assumptions they are importing. Here's the key context behind the U.A.E. export change. Washington is treating advanced computing hardware as part of a strategic alliance, not just a product category. On July 10th, the U.S. Commerce Department published a Federal Register notice loosening export controls for the United Arab Emirates. The move allows easier shipments of certain military items, commercial satellites, spacecraft, and license-free access to advanced computing items, including AI chips and servers for the U.A.E. government and approved companies. Named beneficiaries include G42 and Core42, along with US companies operating there such as Amazon, Apple, and XAI. What stands out is the grouping. The U.A.E. is being moved into a Commerce Department category with broader license exceptions for military and dual-use items, but it becomes the only country in that group that is not a member of multilateral export control regimes. Israel and Saudi Arabia remain outside it. The policy rationale points to decades of US-U.A.E. cooperation against Iran and its proxies, the U.A.E.'s role in Operation Epic Fury, and an economic relationship that includes more than $1 trillion in foreign direct investment in the United States. That matters because the new rules could accelerate AI and defense tech flows into a key Gulf market. The question listeners should be asking is simple. If the door opens wider for sensitive chips and systems, how tightly can diversion and end use be monitored in practice? Now to Meta, and a very familiar lesson about consent. The company removed a new AI-powered image generation feature from Instagram after days of backlash over privacy and user control. The feature, tied to Meta's Muse image work, allowed people to create or alter images using public Instagram profile pictures and other user-generated content, without explicit prior notification to the people whose images could be used. Meta acknowledged it had missed the mark and said the feature was no longer available. The problem is not that creative AI tools exist. It is the default assumption that a public profile photo is fair material for synthetic editing. For users, a face is not just data. It is identity, reputation, and context. Privacy advocates had already criticized the opt-out mechanism, with Donald Campbell of Foxglove calling it an obvious recipe for disaster, even for public accounts. The practical takeaway is that AI features touching personal imagery need consent built in before launch, not explained after backlash. Moving fast is one thing. Making people feel like their likeness was used first and discussed later is how trust gets broken. Finally, let's talk about AI in filmmaking, because Christopher Nolan is making a cultural argument, not just a technical one. Nolan, a two-time Oscar winner now preparing an IMAX Odyssey adaptation, told The Telegraph that Gen Z filmmakers and audiences are mounting the fastest broad rejection of generative AI he has seen. His phrase was that the technology is hitting at exactly the wrong time in Hollywood, after years of heavily virtual production, and just as audiences show renewed interest in more tactile, more real storytelling. He says his own children judge AI slop quickly and harshly because they know the online world so well. Nolan is not saying every AI application is useless. The sharper point is that generative tools are running into an audience that can often feel when work lacks intention. He pointed to young directors Curry Barker, with Obsession, and Kane Parsons, with Backrooms, whose practical effects heavy work is connecting with younger viewers. Against a backdrop of Hollywood labor and policy debates, including SAG-AFTRA's endorsement of the Trump administration's AI framework, and a recent executive order requiring 30-day government review of new AI models, this becomes bigger than one director's taste. For studios, the question is not only whether AI can generate a scene, it is whether audiences still feel a human creative contract on the other side of the screen. Final flash. Today's AI stories move through the courtroom, global infrastructure, platform design, and creative culture. The common thread is control. Who owns the data? Who gets the hardware? Who sets the defaults? And who decides when technology still feels trustworthy? Thank you for staying informed with DigiAll Tech News. We'll be back with more updates as they develop.